Hello and welcome to Wash Plus's Google Hangout series. This Hangout is brought to you by Wash Plus, a multi-year project funded by USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Wash Plus is implemented by FHI 360 in partnership with CARE and Windrock International. Wash Plus supports healthy households and communities by creating and delivering interventions leading to improvements in water, sanitation and hygiene, and household air pollution. Wash Plus Google Hangouts are designed to showcase the work we and our partners are doing around the world to improve the quality of life for people everywhere. Today, our guest speaker is Pat McArdle, who will be talking to us about solar cooking and the integrated cooking method. Pat is a retired senior Foreign Service officer, former Peace Corps volunteer, and veteran of the United States Navy. Her fictional war memoir, Farishta, published by Penguin Books in 2011, was inspired by Pat's year spent in northern Afghanistan, where she first learned about the potential of solar cooking. Pat has served on the board of directors of Solar Household Energy and Solar Cookers International, and is the editor of the Solar Cooker Review. Joining Pat today is our moderator, Dan Campbell from the Wash Plus project, who will be taking questions from the audience. Welcome, Pat and Dan.
Thank you very much, Dan and Taj, for giving me this opportunity. I first got involved with clean cook stoves while serving in northern Afghanistan in 2005. I was the senior diplomatic advisor to a British Army infantry unit. Nothing to do at all with solar cookers, but every time we went out on patrol, I saw all these young kids collecting brush and animal dung and hauling it back to their villages for their mother's cooking fires. There was basically nothing else to burn since, according to the locals, during Afghanistan's decades of war, many of the fruit and nut orchards had been cut down for firewood, as well as all the trees and basically all the forests. I also noticed how sunny it was in Afghanistan, even in the winter, and I decided to build and demonstrate a solar cooker that I'd found on the website of Solar Cookers International, and there it is. I was in a village up in the Hindu Kush when this picture was taken. When the villagers saw me boiling water with sunshine, they wanted to make their own solar cookers, and some of the men even decided to save their cigarette foils so they could make their own. For the past 10 years, I've been promoting solar cooking around the world as part of the clean cooking system that we call the integrated cooking method.
Pat, could you tell us how is the integrated cooking method different from the concept of fuel stacking?
Sure. This poster was created for a 2012 integrated cooking workshop in the Gambia, a small country on the west coast of Africa. On the left, you can see two types of solar cookers. In the middle, there's a heat retention cooker or basket, and on the right are two types of fuel-efficient stoves. This is the integrated cooking method, which I will be explaining. Fuel stacking, a term used by the cook stove sector, refers to the use of multiple fuels and stoves at the same time. And this is not always a good thing, because if you have a fuel-efficient stove and you're still burning a three-stone fire, that's not good. For example, simmering a pot of beans over a traditional fire, but also having an approved biomass stove or an LPG stove for boiling water or frying food. The integrated cooking method is a deliberate combined use of these three cooking devices that you see on this poster to dramatically reduce emissions and fuel consumption. But only one of the devices actually burns any fuel. That's the fuel-efficient stove. When you use each device depends on the time of day, the weather, and the time that the meals are served. We always teach people to use a zero-emission solar cooker when the sun is shining. In other words, cook with free energy, free solar energy whenever you can. Basically, why cook with wood that you've had to gather or another combustible fuel you've had to buy when the sun is providing free fuel for cooking? The primary cooking device in the integrated cooking method is a solar cooker. Let's start by looking at the two basic types of solar cookers, slow cookers and fast cookers. You can see in this slide a box and panel cooker. They heat food slowly like an oven between 121 to 176 Celsius. That's 250 to 350 Fahrenheit. They're great for baking bread and pastries or roasting meat, simmering vegetables. You can make soups and stews and cook meat, fish, grains, and fruits with these. In the top left-hand photo, you see a lady putting a sheet of cookies into a box cooker. This is actually an outdoor bakery, and this is how these women make a living. The other slide shows Sudanese refugees cooking hundreds of pots of food and making tea for a festival that I attended at a refugee camp in Chad a few years ago, all with solar thermal energy. Just imagine how much wood these women would have had to carry and then burn to cook this much food. The next slide you see shows parabolic and Fresnel lens solar cookers. They generate a very high heat underneath the pot. They'll cook as fast and as hot as a gas burner from just after sunup until just before sundown. And they can also be used in very cold weather. Fresnel lens solar cookers are now being manufactured, like this one from Cal Sunlight. Both parabolic and Fresnel solar cookers can reach very high temperatures, as I mentioned, and there are a lot of parabolic solar cookers already on the market. Some are now using heat storage units that are just being developed, and there's some universities in the US and overseas that are working on this technology. This permits nighttime cooking with solar energy that was collected during the day. The next slide shows the second device used with the integrated cooking method, and that's a fuel-efficient stove. I was in Mexico a few years ago at an integrated cooking workshop with Larry Winiarski, the inventor of the rocket stove. Larry was teaching families how to build super efficient rocket stoves using just 16 clay bricks. Here's Larry making a tortilla with one of his 16 brick rocket stoves. Improved combustion stoves are incredibly important for reducing emissions and fuel use, but we recommend that no fuel be burned during the day when free solar energy is available. In the next slide, you can see retained heat containers, or hay baskets. These are incredibly easy to make using locally available materials, and here you can see Larry teaching a group of Mexican women how to make a retained heat container using a black plastic garbage bag and straw. The one I use at my home is an old laundry basket stuffed with pillows, but you can make a retained heat container with a cardboard box or even a hole in the ground and just stuff it with insulation like straw or crumpled newspaper or dried grass, cardboard, cotton, or wool, as long as you provide a 6-inch layer of insulation all around the cooking pot. Hay baskets can reduce fuel usage when used with a combustion stove by 2/3, and they can double the efficiency of a solar cooker.
Pat, could you tell us, how does this method reduce fuel and emissions?
Sure. With the integrated cooking method, people's first cooking choice is always zero-emission free solar energy for up to 2 meals a day whenever the sun is shining. Biomass and other combustible fuels are used only when the sun is not available, so you'll save a lot of fuel.
Okay. Please explain to us how a retained heat container works and how it eliminates the need for a simmer function on a rocket or other improved cook stove.
Well, by encouraging people to use a fuel-efficient stove when there's no sun, we are trying to reduce their need to burn biomass in a 3-stone fire. But there's still a problem with most improved cook stoves that retained heat has solved. Improved cook stoves are most efficient and produce the fewest harmful emissions when they're burning at high power. If the flame is reduced to slowly simmer a pot of beans for several hours, these stoves usually start to smoke, which sort of defeats the purpose of a fuel-efficient stove. Also, most women really don't want to sit next to an improved cook stove for several hours, feeding tiny pieces of wood into the combustion chamber while their beans simmer. But we've solved that problem with retained heat containers. If you bring a pot of food to a rolling boil over high heat for 10 to 15 minutes, you can extinguish the fire or put another pot on, put the pot of boiling food inside a retained heat container, and then leave it to slowly simmer for 3 to 4 hours using no fuel at all. This can cut biomass or LPG consumption by up to 60%, and the food will still be piping hot even after 3 hours in the basket.
Oh, very interesting. How can a retained heat container double the number of times that a solar cooker can be used during the day to provide a hot meal?
Well, at lower altitudes, when the sun is high in the sky for 6 to 8 hours a day, most box and panel solar cookers can cook 2 meals per day. Food for lunch is cooked between 9 a.m. and noon, and then pots of food for the evening meal are put into the solar cooker and left in the sun from 12:30 until around 3:30. Since no one wants to eat dinner at 3:30, the steaming pots of food are then placed inside the retained heat containers, where they'll continue to simmer gently with no moisture loss and very little heat loss for 3 more hours. This allows the family to consume a piping hot solar cooked meal after dark. Water boiled in the afternoon can also be kept overnight in a thermos bottle and then used for tea and coffee in the morning. With a parabolic solar cooker, a woman can start several pots of food in sequence, just like she would over an open fire, And then once one pot is boiling, she can remove it from the solar cooker, put it in a retained heat basket to finish cooking, and then start boiling another pot of food. I did this once at the Pentagon and cooked 2 chickens, 3 pots of beans, and a pot of rice for a bunch of soldiers, and they were very impressed. I'll end this presentation with quotes from 2 biomass cook stove experts who agree with me that integrated cooking really is a great way to save fuel and reduce emissions. This one's from EPA's Jim Jetter. Here's what he says, quote, "It seems to me that integrated cooking with a solar cooker, a retained heat cooker, and a combustion type stove may be a great approach." And here's one from Approvecho's Dean Still, which he wrote back in 2001. Quote, "In a perfect world, perhaps with a great non-polluting wood stove, would come a retained heat cooker, a solar oven for baking, and a parabolic reflector for boiling water. The whole package might cost $100, which is dinner and a movie for some folks. I agree completely with Dean." Please check out the integrated cooking page on Solar Cookers International Wiki website, which you can see here on the screen. You can also check out my YouTube channel, Solar Wind Mama, where you'll find more videos about solar cooking, clean combustion cook stoves, retained heat cookers, and integrated cooking. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Pat, for sharing your knowledge and experience on this important issue. At this time, do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, this is Tad Sharif at Wash Plus. This is a question for Pat. Pat, I recently came upon Dr. Kirk Smith's article where he talks about the changing paradigms in clean cooking. In the article, Dr. Smith says that the traditional paradigms that have dominated thinking over the last half century over clean cooking need to change. So he proposes new paradigms to help us in the future with solving the clean cooking problem. I was particularly struck by this old paradigm, making the available clean, versus a new paradigm that Dr. Smith proposes of making the clean available. So it's really interesting to hear, I think, your perspective, Pat, on what you think about this paradigm shift, particularly as it applies to solar cooking and the integrated cooking method.
Well, thanks very much for the question. First, I want to commend Dr. Smith for all the work he's done over the last more than almost 2 decades to bring to the world's attention the great health risk for people who have to cook over open fires. He's done an amazing job. And the 2 paradigms that he talks about, the old paradigm is making the available clean, and the new paradigm to make the clean available. I agree with him, but I see these paradigms as in a slightly different way. First, the currently available fuel for the world's poor is basically wood, dung, and crop residue, and the currently available technology for most of them is combustion stoves or 3-stone fires. Now, over the past more than a decade, the Department of Energy, the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, and the Shell Foundation have spent tens of millions of dollars to develop cleaner burning cook stoves, which is a great thing. But some of these stoves just funnel the smoke outside where it still pollutes the air. And as I mentioned in my presentation, some of them, if they're not burned on high heat, they still emit smoke. Also, as we've seen with the new WHO air quality guidelines, it's really difficult to make a combustion stove that adequately reduces combustion and is really clean. So I agree with Dr. Smith that we should make the clean available, but I disagree that that clean should be liquefied petroleum gas in canisters. This is a fossil fuel that has to be extracted and processed and transported and then subsidized by countries that really should be using their money, their tax revenues to improve education and health and infrastructure. At the recent G7 meeting, world leaders did acknowledge that we're approaching the end of the fossil fuel era. So I would question the idea to get the world's poor hooked on fossil fuels when we really should be moving towards renewables, especially for them. Dr. Smith is also referring to electricity, and solar-generated electricity is an excellent way to generate power. I'm about to put solar panels on the roof of my house. But I think that for the world's poor, distributed power is going to be how most rural communities get access to electricity. They're not going to have access to a grid. But for most of them, that means enough electricity for lighting and maybe to power a TV or a radio or a cell phone, but not to power a cooking device. To power a single induction cook stove, one little cook stove top, requires about 100 square feet of solar panels. This is not affordable for the world's poor. So while I do agree that we need to make the clean available, I think the clean we need to make available is solar energy. Enough solar energy hits planet Earth every hour to power all human activity for a year. And if a small amount of the tens of millions of dollars that has been spent on research for biomass cook stoves over the last decade could be spent on R&D to make solar cookers cheaper, more efficient, more available, and to work on solar thermal heat storage, I think making this technology available to the world's poor would be far more effective and far more sustainable.
Thank you, Pat, for answering that question. And thank you, Dan, for moderating the session. Thank you to the audience for participating in this Hangout from Wash Plus. And a special thanks to Pat McArdle for sharing her valuable insights and experience on solar cooking and the integrated cooking method. To download this Hangout, please visit our website, washplus.org. Thank you.